A Medford doctor is practicing again after struggling with a serious addiction. Back in 2012, Dr. Sean Sills lost his license after he became addicted to the pain medicine he was supposed to be using to care for his patients. Tonight, in part 2 of Overcoming Addiction, NBC5's Devin Gooden sits down with him to hear how his addiction got started and how he was able to overcome it.
Again, your background, how good your childhood was, how bad your childhood was, what your career was, what your income level was. Addiction can affect anybody at any time.
From the outside looking in, Dr. Sean Michael Sills has it all.
And I wanted to be like somebody who cured cancer, you know, that was one of my goals.
He worked hard to reach his goals, persevering through 26 years of schooling. He never even took a single sip of alcohol until the end of his anesthesiology residency. But that one sip changed everything.
I love the feeling of feeling different. And that was what kind of woke up the dragon of my addiction.
Dr. Sills says it wasn't until he owned his own business in the Rogue Valley he realized he was thirsting for something more.
I remember just being so afraid and so afraid of failure. And I remember pulling all-nighters and coming kind of to like the point where I was running out of my own strength. And I remember like yesterday wondering, I wonder how I would feel if I gave myself a shot of morphine.
He gave himself that shot and addiction took hold of his life.
For me as a doctor, I was very afraid to share that I was even having trouble because there's such a stigma with addiction that if I was to ask for help, well then people would know I would have a problem and then that would ruin my reputation and ruin my practice.
Dr. Sills got the help he needed from his father, but it didn't stick.
I was able to stay sober for about a year or two, and then a couple of years later, I had the opposite problem. Instead of the fear of failure, I was actually succeeding and doing really well.
His old habits were hard to fight.
Glad that Dr. Sills is working elsewhere. The Oregon Medical Board has decided to suspend Dr. Sills' medical license for 2 months, put him on probation for 10 years, required him to pay a $5,000 fine, and undergo rehab.
And I'll never forget kind of the moment where I realized I was in a lot of trouble, and that's when my dad came by and he's like, I don't know, son, I guess you're just gonna lose it all. You're just gonna lose your practice, you're gonna lose your family, you're gonna lose everything.
He almost did. Sills struggled with his addiction as his life crumbled around him. He lost his family, his license, and his practice.
I was actually close to my office, and I had given myself a pretty large dose of IV methadone. And methadone is slow in the way it acts, and you can feel it starting to come on and get stronger. And I was feeling like I was about to pass out and like I was in a lot of trouble. And my nurse was standing there and she could see me shakingly, quickly trying to gather all these supplies. I remember her just kind of looking out of the corner of my eye like, what is going on? And I disappeared to the bathroom and I started an IV on myself, and I kept giving myself reversal medication for about an hour to try to make sure that I didn't overdose.
It was that moment that Dr. Sills says he knew he had to turn his life around. He was quickly losing all of the things that he had worked so hard for, and it was time to get help, but he didn't have to do it alone.
My nurse knew I was in trouble, and so she started another arm of help. And that arm was to call the health professional program, which was a diversion program for doctors. And what she did is she said, Dr. Sills is a good doctor, but he's not himself these days. This counselor came up and he said, well, Sean, you're powerless over these things. But I had to let go of the reins and I had to surrender and turn it over. And so that was actually a very liberating moment, and that's actually one of the first steps towards recovery is coming to that.
Today, Dr. Sills lives in his truth. He knows he is an addict and he's powerless to that addiction. He's working hard at his recovery and is no longer afraid to reach out for help.
This disease is a disease that takes you out if you isolate and if you're alone.
He doesn't hide from his past, knowing his story can help others.
And I make sure that I'm part of the recovery community, and I go to recovery meetings, and I go to I hang out with other people in recovery, and it's something that has to permeate your life.
Dr. Sills realizes his chance of relapse is high as an anesthesiologist, but he puts in the work every day, knowing he has nothing to be ashamed of and that real change is possible once you choose it for yourself.
If I could find recovery, I think anybody could find recovery.
In Medford, Devin Gooden, NBC5 News.
Devin, thank you. If you're struggling with addiction, know there is help available, but it's up to you to take that step. Tomorrow on part 3 of Overcoming Addiction, we sit down with a Rogue Valley man to learn about his lifelong battle with alcoholism and how he's now using his own struggle to help others.